Hey guys, this is Anne Marie, and today we are disrupting normal programming. I usually share an organizational video on the first Monday of the month, but I'm knee deep in this DIY scrapbooking challenge on a message board, and so I wanted to share one of my knockoffs I'm creating for that. So I'm gonna fake it till I make it with paper 10 from Paige Evans' Blooming Wild collection. I've already done a huge stash dive, and I've gathered all the dupes I could find for the Blooming Wild collection, and you can find that video here. I'll put a link um, in the upper right corner, or it'll also be in the description box below. Today, I'm going to move on to actually creating knockoffs of specific items in the kit, exploring different techniques that you can use to recreate the looks at home with stuff you already have on hand. So we will be faking this paper here. This is paper 10 from the Blooming Wild collection. I really loved the multicolored clusters of various sizes and types of flowers that kind of just covered the whole paper. I was really disappointed that I actually didn't have anything similar in my stash, so I knew that this was what I wanted to try to dupe first. And the first idea that popped in my head was to use stamps. I think you could probably also explore like using stencils or gluing down a bunch of tiny die cuts. If you don't think that you have stamps that could achieve a similar look. However, I knew I had stamps, and I also felt it would be the quickest. Although, spoiler alert, this still took several hours. All right, first I went through my stash of stamps. I found any and all tiny flower stamps that I had. So then I went through those kind of again, and I selected a specific few that I liked, and that also kind of gave me a variety of sizes and shapes. And for at least two of the colors, I chose two stamps that I could use with that color so that it would give me kind of a better mix and variety on my page. Then I went and I started with 6 ink colors. I did add in a lighter blue later that matched with some of the papers I'd already pulled for my knockoff collection. So I had, selected this kind of rough rainbow of inks: red, orange, yellow, mint green, blurple, and pink. And I generally kind of think in rainbow order when I'm organizing anyway. So I placed the stamps that I wanted to use in that same rough rainbow order on a spare acrylic block. So like the 2 stamps I used with red, then the 1 stamp I used with orange, the one I used with yellow, the one I used with green, etc. And that helped me keep track of them as I went and to be consistent with my colors too, so that I wasn't taking a stamp that I'd stamped in red and putting it on my yellow ink pad, because that could pollute my ink pad, but then also it would make the colors muddy when I would stamp again, and it would end up with kind of brown colors, and that's not what I wanted. All right, so finally it was time to start stamping. I used a scrap underneath the edges so I didn't stamp all over my work surface. I know it would just, wipe up. It's not that I'm a neat freak, trust me, but it's because the ink would also stay wet on my desk, and that would get on my arms, and I could accidentally transfer to the paper that I was working on, or I would, push the paper into like a puddle of ink by accident. This also allowed me to stamp off the edges all around the paper, which helps this look like a continuous pattern, more like the actual piece of paper that we are trying to duplicate. As I stamped, I tried to create clusters that kind of varied in width and height. And as I worked on a cluster, I would rotate the stamp so that I was piecing together the images so they almost kind of nested together. So like for the tulips, for example, so they're pointing kind of with those 3 petals pointing up, and I would place another so it was kind of nesting into that, not all pointing the same direction. However, I do want to give a warning with that. And I was very often too impatient to consistently be good about this, but I would not recommend rotating your stamp while you're holding it over the paper, because if you're at all any kind of butterfingers, like I am, then you run a very high risk of dropping the inked stamp onto your paper, and that could mess up the pattern in a way that's really hard to conceal. For the same reason, or that same reason, you're going to want to wipe off your block occasionally. I tried to wipe it off after every stamp change because that helped avoid stray ink kind of polluting the background. It still happens sometimes because the block I was using was a little too big and I would bump my ink pad and then bump my paper. But those lines were a little easier to camouflage. I could stamp to kind of cover it up sometimes. Sometimes instead of clusters, I went for more of a vine feel. And I just would imagine a vine kind of curling around the paper, and I would picture how flowers or leaves would hang off of that in different directions and try to emulate that. I also tried to avoid any straight lines because this is a more organic, not geometric pattern. And that's really in your favor anyway, that we're doing this with an organic pattern because they have a lot more variety and flow, and it's truly less difficult to make a mistake. And this is super easy to say, but my biggest piece of advice in general on this is to not overthink it. And I want you to ask yourself, what's the absolute worst that could really happen? You spend some time crafting and then what? You don't love the results? Okay, I don't think I'm the only one. This happens to me anyway. This happens on a regular basis to me. I spend time crafting and then maybe I don't love it when I'm done. That still happens to me sometimes, and it hasn't ruined crafting for me overall. To me, it's just like another opportunity to problem solve, or I scrap it and move on. It's okay to experiment. It's, if you hate it, you can recycle it. You can cut it down. You can cover it up. It is not the end of the world, I promise. And there's a really good chance that you're going to have fun doing it and that you will love the end result. So try not to get too hung up on it. Just move around the paper, kind of go with the flow. As you're expanding your patterns, look for the colors that are around where you're getting ready to stamp. So I tried not to place the same colors right close to each other so that I wasn't doing like a field of red and then a field of purple and then another field of red. I would try to go with the orange next or the pink. And basically I would kind of put my finger down where I'm getting ready to stamp, and then I would go through my rainbow order and see where's the red. Okay, where's the closest orange? Okay, where's the closest yellow? And I looked at each color until I found whichever color was the furthest away from this point. And that's the color I would choose to stamp with. Sometimes all the colors are pretty close, especially like in the center of the paper or just even as you're finishing up. In that case, I would try to select one that was not directly touching the space. So if I had done, for example, red, then purple, and then I needed to use red again, I would try to select the other stamp that I pulled out for red. So I'm still going to have some variety in my stamping. I might also choose to have a smaller or larger area as compared to that other cluster of that color if it's really, really close. Every once in a while, I would also kind of just back off and look at the whole thing overall. And if I noticed that a bunch of patterns were leaning left, for example, I could correct that by making my next couple clusters lean right or make more of a rounded circle. Or I also did vine patterns, like I mentioned, that kind of thing. Last but not least, to finish everything off, I found some tiny dot stamps in my stash, and I used these to make different color flower tops and centers. I tried to add like a little, it was supposed to look kind of like little falling petals with a raindrop. Don't know that I love that. That's the one thing I might change if I had to go back and redo this. And I added a little bit of depth to my blurple flowers with that light blue in a similar kind of scattered dot pattern, but they were smaller and they kind of covered a larger area. So I just kind of filled in some white space with that. And I liked the look that that gave too, of like actual flowers with various colors all together. Then this was one of my favorite things. I found these little dashed lines that were supposed to represent a skunk smelling. But I stamped them in that same kind of mint green ink, and that kind of implied the feeling of vines. I only added it around my leaves, and I just liked, the difference, the variety that it added, and the depth and the detail. So here's my finished paper. We'll compare that to the original. I'm pretty happy with it. It makes me happy to look at it. All those colors and all the flowers, two of my favorite things. So I love it. And I'm looking forward to using it. So I hope if you try something like this, you'll come back and share, because I would love to see. Thanks so much for watching. I really appreciate your time. If you enjoyed this video, please consider clicking the thumbs up or subscribing. I will see you on Thursday with another Fake It Till I Make It, another counterfeit, and I hope you have a scrappy, happy week. Bye.